Hello. First of all, thank you all very much for queuing. I really appreciate that. It's always a compliment, and I feel very privileged to do these, so I've got to be honest. The air conditioning has just been put on by the rather beautiful Laura. Just being clever. Thank you, because it is very hot in here, and when you get a lot of bodies in here, it's only gets hotter. Well, depends on how you like that body or not, I suppose. But so, I tried. That wasn't about you. Right, so welcome. For those of you that don't know me, so who here is this their first time? Talam, Mantor, my workshop or whatever. Okay, so interesting. So a real group of mixed people. Shut up. This corner will heckle me. I really apologise. It's not exclusive. It's not a group. It does happen. So we just pretend that they're not there. So my name is Deb. I am a therapist. That's what I do for a living. I've been doing that for quite a while. I've got about 50,000 hours of experience. I teach career professional development. Anyone here a therapist or a counsellor, or you don't have to say, you might want to. Some of you are. If you want to get in contact with me on FetLife, this is an hour's free worth of CPD. So, you know, that's worth 60 quid alone. CPD is very expensive. I also run a Thursday night workshop for 2 hours for free for anybody who wants to come. And they are questions that you have asked me to cover, and the next 3 weeks are covered. If you want to come to those, they're 7 till 9, they're on Zoom, they're free of charge, and they're 2 hours of CPD every week, which means you'll fill your quota for CPD if you're a psychiatrist, psychologist, psychotherapist, counsellor, any of those, you'll fulfill your criteria needed for a year within a couple of months. So, and again, you have to send me your real name. I'm sorry, but you do. And I will just print it up and send it back to you as a PDF. So if you want that, you can have that as well. These workshops were started about 6 years ago with the idea of doing a couple, seeing how they went. Still doing them. We thought we'd run it down to a couple of people. The idea of these is you ask the questions. They're a Q&A session, they're not anything else. So I never know what's going to come up. It's a good test of my knowledge. It feels like an exam every single month. I'm not always here, like I'm not here in May because I'm in America for cheerleading. Not me, clearly. I'm a flyer.
Are you not? Really? I thought you were a Tumblr.
I could be a good base. Yeah, really not. That my daughter runs a world championship level team, and they're going back out there to protect their title, and they're just doing something called the Triple Crown as well. So I go every so often because we do quite a fair bit of psychology with the kids as well. So we talk about mental blocks and different things. The idea of these workshops is it can be anything you want it to be. So it can be about kink, it can be about relationships, it can be about communication problems, issues, or anything you want it to be. It can be a how do I do this? Why do I do this? It can be to do with kink, it can be to do with polyamory, ethical non-monogamy, it can be anything you want it to be. So up to you to ask. What normally happens is nobody puts their hands up for a couple of minutes, then everybody puts their hands up. Then we run out of time and you all grab me afterwards. Deb, who has been doing kink for 5 years or under? Yeah. 5 or under, okay. 10 or under? 20 or under? 30 or under? 40 or under? God, I'm so
I mean, is it or under in it? Like,
yeah. It just makes me very old. That's what that makes me. So I started when I was 17 and I'm 57 in June. So that's me. So I've been doing this for a long time as well. I am a submissive. I'm also a cup queen. So much so I just had a t-shirt dress made. Look at this. Go upstairs. Seriously, look. Cup queen. That's what I am. And I'm submissive as well. I have switched a lot in the past. It's not what I do anymore. I'm more into the emotional stuff, although I do like some ultra violence. I probably play on the edge for a lot of people over some things and really boring for others, depending on what your kink is and what you like to do. So, floor's over to you. What would you like to ask? What would you like to know? Explore. I'm no expert. There is no such thing as a kink expert. Anyone who tells you they are, they're full of shit. Seriously, I really know my stuff. I'm an expert. Expert means anything over 10,000 hours, roughly, in life and business. What does that mean? And that makes you an expert with that person in that one particular thing. Kink is this incredibly expansive field, as in poly, as in ethical non-monogamy, whatever all the labels change over the years. I was definitely bi in the 80s. I'm definitely not anymore, apparently. So, I'm demi apparently now, but it's good to know. I think labels can help us. They can help us communicate with somebody else. There's no point me talking to a female straight submissive as a potential partner. That's not going to go anywhere, is it? Because it's not. I might make a friend, but I'm not going to make anything else. And if you're looking for sex and play, that clarity really matters. So, thanks. Love. That's just.
It's not you, but at least it's no one else in the
It's
room.
just always me. Right. So, questions. What would you like to ask, or what would you like to find out about them?
What's the difference between poly and ethical?
Cool. So,
Yeah, if you're not monogamy, it's not ethical. You're not doing it right.
Yeah. Right. So, what really?
I can get out.
You sure? You're okay.
Sorry.
Right, so ethical non-monogamy is an umbrella term for everything else that fits underneath it as far as relationships that are concerned that you would like to involve somebody else in. So you could argue that being a cut queen is ethically non-monogamous. Actually, that's interesting because I'm the one who's being monogamous potentially, but the relationship is ethically non-monogamous by being a cut queen. If you don't know what a cut queen is, it's when normally a cis-born woman, it is gender specific, it is a title, I'm sorry, it is, that's the title of it. There isn't a non-gender name for it actually yet. That's interesting. Cuckold, cut queen. We haven't quite got there with that one. Open to suggestions. We could start something new. That cuck will do, won't it? Should we just call us all cucks?
Cuck royalty.
Right. So cucks. So cucks. I like my partner sleeping with somebody else. I get pleasure from it. However, I don't just get pleasure from it. I want to be humiliated over it. I want comparisons. I want to feel like a piece of shit. I want to hear all sorts of things. But that's ethically. It's ethical as long as my partner also tells that other person that that's what's happening, or if I want a recording, it's all about the ethics of it. So ethical non-monogamy is this huge umbrella term that covers everything, where somebody might say polyamorous or polysexual, or there are hundreds of titles. That's part of the problem. But the key word there is about ethics. It's about not being monogamous. It's about being with other people, be that emotionally, sexual, physical, could just be play if you're kinky. Could be emotional, can be about love. Definitely can. People have multiple relationships. I once ran a workshop many years ago. You were there actually, on poly, and this one woman stood up. That's where I met you the first time. This one woman stood up and said she had, I can't remember, she had like 14 partners. And my reaction was, oh, fuck off. It wasn't a very ethical response. I was like, how can you do that? Like, what, do you just see one person once each month? Which is fine if that's what everybody wants. But that's where the negotiation and the ethics come in. And I've learned better to keep my mouth a bit more shut nowadays. It's interesting. But I was like, God, how do you do that? Like 14 partners. That's a lot to sort out. Because if you think you get shit in one partnership, you're going to get it in your second and your third and your fourth. And you might not. You might have beautiful aspects of it. All relationships do have their problems at some point, don't they? They do. Everyone gets tired, everyone gets stressed, everybody has something going on in their lives, or has something physical or emotional or mental, and it impacts all of our relationships. So just times that by quite a lot. And that's so it's just an umbrella term that covers everything else. Is that enough of an answer for you? Yeah? Okay. Different question. Who's got a question?
What do you think should be amongst your top 5 of negotiations when you negotiate?
Oh, damn. That's a really good question. In my experience, what are your top 5 negotiations that you should negotiate? Do you mean in a relationship, a scene, play scene, sex? All the above? I think boundaries are the most important thing you need to learn to have for yourself. Knowing what you will do, knowing what you are happy doing, and knowing what you're happy to live with the consequences of, which, by the way, is 100% failure rate, because you cannot know. I don't think you can fully consent to anything because you do not know what really is going to happen 3 months, 5 months, 5 years down the line. I've got a private doctor sometimes because I don't want to wait on the waiting list for jabs into my hips. And the reason my hips hurt so much all the time is because the amount of punching, because I like punching, both my bursa sacs are split above my hip bones. And if someone punches me in that point now, I absolutely, could you just go a bit more round? Could you just do a bit more this? Could you please be careful? because I'm like, oh, that's me out. I'm very strong on boundaries around what's your knowledge and experience. Please don't go above it. Please play below your experience level or up to. Don't try and be clever. Oh, I've just bought this new toy. Look, I think it creates blood. Let's just open you up. I also want one of my top negotiations. So it's like, what's your experience? I need honesty from you. Yeah. What do you hope to get out of this next session? What does it look like for both of us? What do we want to feel like afterwards? So imagine the ending. What do I want to feel? Do I want to be pushed? I think you have to. I don't really play with safe words so much anymore, but sometimes I do if I'm with a new person because they don't know my limits. I say I like a punch to my face, to my eye, to my jaw. What does that mean? To my stomach. I met somebody the other day who says I really like smashing people in their kidneys.
I really don't like you.
And I was like, I think that's just become a boundary. My stomach, maybe actually, especially being a fatter woman, I can take a punch in a different way. It's definitely better. The more fat you've got, if you want to punch people, fat people are good for that. The cushioning, and because of the fat around our organs and everything else as well, makes a difference biologically. Anyone who is medical or slightly biological will know that. And you've got a different layer, so it's got different protection. If I'm playing with somebody who's tiny compared to somebody who's big, I'm going to use very different ideas around impact and what that means and where. I really am, because if there's this much skin between that person and their lungs, or like even under here, if I go for like a punch or something, it's very different. So I'm really sorry, but you need to take those things into account. I want to know if that person's mental and emotional and physical health is okay. One of the most horrific things I heard from Rain de Grey was she was tied in the woods one day. I've said this before. Her top was diabetic. He wasn't looking after himself. He collapsed, and as he collapsed, when he pulled the ropes, he broke her jaw on the way down. Now, listen, I'm not trying to horrify people either, right? These accidents are fucking rare. However, don't be one of them. What's the safety setup here? What can I reach? We're in the middle of the woods. Can I reach a phone? Is there anything here? Can I talk to my phone? Is it strapped? Is it... I also want to know, actually, what anyone here got any form of first aid qualification? Any form? Please, if you're going to be a top. Breath play is so trendy. Choking is the trendiest thing around at the moment. It's all over fucking TikTok. I mean, freak talk in some areas. And it's really dangerous because my first word is, I know how to resuscitate. I can't resuscitate myself if I'm on the fucking floor, passed out or dying. Mm-hmm. I cannot phone. I know that I will phone. I know that I'm really happy to phone 999 very quickly. But it's still one of the biggest killers of all people who play. There have been deaths every single year because of it, especially around, also my limits are alcohol and drugs. Mm-hmm. I want you to be stone cold fucking sober when we play. However, one of my biggest things I would love to do that I haven't done yet is I would like to be so passed out and have terrible things happen to me and have someone film it and play it back. But the reason I won't do that is because of the drugs I have to take for that. They're illegal, but not only that, the aftersides and the after effects that happens afterwards are not pleasant for months. So I don't want that part of it. The fantasy is really good as a fantasy. So I want to know what experience you've got. I want to know what boundaries I've got. I want to know if you're going to listen to my boundaries. Often I will say or do something if someone says, well, no, you're not having that. Big red flag for me. Well, actually, yeah, I suppose I could do that. We could put a safe word there. Okay, that's a green flag. We're now talking, we're having a conversation. I want to know that someone's going to listen to my no. I can't bear meeting people who see limits as a competition. So this is my limit, that's my limit, that's my limit. Oh, I need to get past those then, don't we, love? No, they're boundaries because they're boundaries. I've had a split lip and black eye with actual consent. What do you want to do? Break my fucking jaw? Like, come on. Boundaries aren't for pushing. If you like pushing an envelope, find a different way of doing it. Those boundaries are there. So we have hard, maybe medium and soft limits about what we want to do and what we want to try. I would also say if you're playing for someone for the first time, honestly, unless you're going for somebody who's just going to do rope, don't get tied up, don't get into a situation that you cannot get out of. A lot of predators on the scene do play privately. They don't necessarily come to clubs. Ask for help if you need it. That's another one. I'd also ask, it's very much more difficult when you're new. If I turn around and said to anybody, could you give me 3 people that you've played with in the past that would say that you're safe to play with? Could anyone do that here?
Yeah.
It's very hard if you're new, isn't it? I'm new. Come to places, make some friends, join some groups, join some societies, especially of fellow submissives. Also as fellow tops, like I would also say to a top, what's your plan when you get accused of something? What? What's your plan? If you get accused of something and something's going to go wrong, what's your plan? What's your backup? And most people say, I've got no fucking idea. Make a plan. Have a plan. And the other favourite question I say to people, what's happened when things have gone wrong in the past? Anyone here had a scene go wrong? Anyone here never had a scene go wrong? Lucky you. Really lucky you. Give it time. And because it will. So plan for it to go wrong. And what I want to know from somebody, especially if they're experienced, is what did you do when it went wrong and what's your plan for when it goes wrong again? Talking is one of the first keys to playing. It isn't whether you've got your fist up someone's arse. That's not the first point of call. It's how safe are you? What does that mean? It really is. But we forget the talking. I'm really privileged. My workshops have now got a reputation. People queue up and often people can't come in. However, I've been to other places where the person doing any form of psychological consent or negotiation workshop has 5 people in, and that person saying, how I'm going to teach you how to Florentine flogger, has got 300 people in. Start here. Start with your first aid. Start with your negotiation skills. Start with your own boundaries. I promise you'll be great for a long term, especially if you know your own boundaries. Your boundaries are based on your values. So if you don't know what your values are, start to work that out. How do I want to be treated? Is it just inside the bedroom? Is it outside the bedroom? Is it outside? I'm out, completely out. I wouldn't wear this anywhere else. I wouldn't wear this in front of my kids or anything because it's rubbing their faces in it. They don't need that either. My mum and dad both knew. My mum died in May. She knew. But again, we don't say, God, blimey, I can't tell you how many lashings I took last night and one up the arse. It's just... have the discussions you're going to have with a person in the right way. Be aware, like you've got the right to be whoever you want to be. It doesn't mean you go and tell everybody all the time. We don't have to do that either. There's a balance. What are yours? What do you want to know from someone? But how do we answer that? Yeah, see, that is such an important point, isn't it? Are you safe? Yeah. If that's the limit where it stops, it's such a good point. Who here is a safe player? See that people hesitate, like, oh, can I say that? Can I? Like, I think I'm safe. I'm as safe as I can be. I take into account my own limits and I negotiate and I hope that I can be as good as I can be. But a lot of people think with their cocks and cunts, I'm afraid, when it comes to this sort of stuff. Are you safe? Yes. Because we're not thinking straight. We're really interested and invested in what's about to happen. And we know when people are turned on psychologically, there's loads of research on this, you do not think straight. Your boundaries start to go. So it's a really good idea to pre-negotiate long before you play. That's not always possible in places like this when you just meet someone who's up for a quick play or anything else as well. It's different. But when we start getting aroused, our arousal system takes over, and we're like, yeah, you can do all of that. Last week you were saying you would never do that. And I think there's real issues when we get to that stage where people retroactively withdraw consent and say I was coerced. Actually, the biggest coercer probably is you, to yourself. You are the biggest danger of, oh, but yeah, they're so good looking, I would let them do that to me. Oh gosh, they've got such a good reputation, of course it's fine. Don't believe reputations, they don't mean anything. Test it out. They mean nothing. Taking their history is interesting, like who have you played with, what have you done? Maybe you don't want names. Oh, I've been playing for this many years, I did that, I've been to these parties, I went to these things before. And if you don't know what those things are, go and ask someone who does know. Go and ask someone, if someone says I went to Extremely Wicked and Sweet Torments, it mean nothing to you because they're not existing clubs anymore. But it would mean something to me because I used to go to those clubs. So ask other people. Honestly, we're all really nice. I get some inboxes that say, Debs, what would you think about this? And I answer. I got an inbox the other day that said, could you have a look at my photo and analyse it for me? And I went, would you like to book a session? That's a bit different, isn't it? Asking for too much. But I'm really happy to say, oh yeah, no, that was a club. Personally though, I would never recommend anyone to play with because I do not know if they're going to be safe for you. I'm never going to take that responsibility on with exes or anything. Go on.
Can we have it actually truly be safe in what we did? So many things could go wrong, so take to a point.
Yeah.
Can we ever actually say that we are playing safe?
I absolutely agree with that. I think we can say I play as safe as I can, taking into account that things could go wrong. People think they're safe, we think they're safe, but things do go wrong. Somebody could have something physically wrong with them in a moment. What if they had some form of seizure, which meant that something broke? What if they're like, this stuff, it does happen. It could be that somebody hyperventilates. Do you know what you're doing? Can you help them down? Have you anyone here like the idea of tying someone up or being tied up?
No, your audience.
No, your audience. Okay. Anyone here own rope? Anyone here? Okay, put your hand up. Anyone here own rope? Right? Okay. Anyone here own proper safety scissors with their rope? Hope your numbers are the same. Anyone here cut that rope ever in their lives? Every single person should cut rope before they play with it.
Amen.
You need to, was that an amen?
Yeah.
Amen. You need to wrap it round. You need to practice pulling it under the skin, like I've got against the skin, not in, clearly that's the wrong form of scissors. Slide underneath and practice the feeling of cutting the rope. Because if you don't, you've never done it before, when you go to do it, believe me, it feels quite weird and quite panicky. And it's a bit harder than you think it is. If the person is already sweating by then, depending on the rope you've got, go on.
And buy decent scissors, because if you try cutting rope with really useless CNC shears, it's really useless.
They don't work.
Yeah.
But in fact, sharpen your scissors every year, if not more than that, if you use them. And if not, just buy new ones.
Seatbelt cutters are
Rope cutters
amazing to quickly.
Yeah. Seatbelt cutters can go.
Some of them you can put,
Sorry?
Some are horsehair trimmers.
Yes.
some of them you can replace the standing one. Like
Yes,
some
you can.
cutters and everything.
So do your research and find out and have a practice. Look, 99% of what you do will never go wrong. Isn't that wonderful? But isn't it nice to know that if it did, you'll be all right? And if you're the top, that the person you're playing with will be all right.
That's the point of pre-mortem.
That's the point of a bingo. I didn't say it, you said it.
Bingo! I'm bingo.
Pre-morteming is one of my favourite things, and that is, let's look at everything that could go wrong in my head and have a solution for it. It's like when you're working with athletes, one of the things that gets in their own way is their head. If you're about to do a round off back handspring fall to a somersault, the principle of landing backwards, landing on your feet, or getting it right, and making sure you've got the twist right, is a big deal. Because the floor's just coming towards you, and then boom, your feet are on it, hopefully. It's the thought that gets in the way as well, though. There's mental blocks. But the more you visualise it, the better chance you've got of doing it. Not me. My level of visualisation is probably still a forward roll. I mean, I can just about do that still. Cartwheel, I think I'd break both my wrists. But so you've got to have the visualisation in place. But the more you practice stuff, the more you visualise it and practice all the things that could happen, the more likely you are to have a great session. Because you don't panic when it does happen.
I think the important thing also is that just because you're bottom doesn't mean that you can't practice those things too, because it's not necessarily about what you're doing. You could be in a room where something goes wrong and someone freezes because they've never experienced it. Because I'm not a top, I'm a bottom, but I've practiced because I play with lots of people in the same spaces. So, and I've seen people go, oh, I don't know what to do. But I've also seen other people go straight into it and square it all away. So your responsibility as bottom doesn't stop because you're not playing. So just look out for one another as well.
Be also aware of yourself. Tell people, I mean, like very direct to people. I've had someone collapsing, tied up to a Landers cross. Great, fabulous, thank you. Let's bring her down and see what the fuck's going on. And then this poor lady starts laughing. It's like, oh yeah, it happens to me a lot, but it's never happened in this sort of environment. Honey, it's the first time that you could have stayed in a dungeon. It's never happened in this environment because you've never been in this environment before.
Be aware
Tell
of your
me.
problems. Please be clear.
I am happy to play with you, but tell me, because I am the one running the show and I am the one that has a problem.
Yeah, it's
Just
honestly
keep
that's
everyone
about
aware of what's going on.
boundaries. It's your responsibility to look after yourself. I think sometimes we give ourselves to a top and say your problem. Our problem, my problem. My problem is me. I want to be safe and I want to know that I'm okay. So it's really important. It's really important. And safe is such an interesting word. I think it's one of those weird things that we use on the scene that we say, oh, the scene is safe, the environment is safe.
Are we talking physical safety, emotional safety?
Well,
What are we
even all of
talking about?
those, you know, people, it's really complex, isn't it? I don't think there's any such thing as safe, which is kind of what we were saying. It's not, nothing is 100% safe. It is as safe as it can be for the here and now. And please bear that in mind when you start playing with someone. If you know, even ethical non-monogamy, we like it. There are a lot of people who are curious about ethical non-monogamy. I think I'd quite like that. I think I'd like multiple partners. And then you hear about that person that's being, you know, like half in their clothes, walking down the street with a shotgun behind them because somebody got jealous. I mean, that's an exaggeration, clearly, but we have to be aware that feelings do come up in these circumstances, and you might think you've got a handle on it, and you might not. So please be aware of, okay, what will I do if I can't handle this? If I'm no good with this, it's really important to find those things out. Okay, who's got a different question?
Over here.
What are your thoughts about, well, for helps and models who suffer with fantasies of murder?
Fantasies of murder. Okay, so what are my thoughts on tops and bottoms who have fantasies of murder? Been there. No, seriously, I've spoken about this before. I remember sleeping with someone. We'd spent the weekend together, it all been very nice, and then by the last time we actually had sex, he started talking about how he quite liked the idea if a 3-year-old was with us and he could murder her while we were having sex.
Oh no.
That went to
Just going. Look, a fantasy of murder is very different from doing a murder or planning or anything else as well. Lots of people have necrophilic type fantasies. It's not that uncommon. We all think it is. It's not. It does happen. And it depends if you feel under threat or what's happening. It depends if it's you or the other person. If the other person really talks a lot about those sort of fantasies and those extreme fantasies, I'm probably not going to go there because it would scare me personally. It worries me. If the person is really engaged in their fantasy and understands that it's a fantasy and it's a limit and wants to find ways to represent that in the bedroom, that's a possible. What would that look like? How would we do it? Like, can I mummify you so you can be in the night? But you want to murder someone, are you definitely going to cut those holes? Right? So there's, what's your take on it? Because you asked the question.
I think that as long as they're getting therapy to discuss it, when they first figure out that that's what they have, and to have very clear boundaries with the other person and take it down halfway a notch.
I would take it down 10 notches. I would really start low. Yeah.
Once safe, and then
Down a couple.
Minimal.
Absolutely. Agree with you. I mean, I think people who stay in therapy still do terrible things. I don't think therapy is the be all and end all. It doesn't cure everybody. The person in therapy has to want to look at what's going on and why. You'd be surprised, I'll come back to you. You'd be surprised how many people I speak to who, I mean, most of my clientele is kinky, queer, ethical non-monogamy. However, I also see families, children, all sorts of groups of people, and have done over the years. And you'll be surprised at how many vanilla people will talk about fantasies around children or fantasies around murder. The thing is, we're not allowed to say them, are we? That's part of the problem. So we don't share stuff often. People can't tell you their fantasies or their fears. I think it's good to go and see a therapist. A therapist will not necessarily, if you're having fantasies of murder, clearly there are ethical guidelines that therapists have to follow. But if you aren't a danger to yourself or others, that shouldn't get in the way for quite a while.
From that, because a lot of people do have extreme fantasies.
They do.
And they want help to understand them. So what do you think is the kind of best place to do that? Obviously there is therapy, but that's a limited resource. Not everyone can get access to that.
Correct.
So how do you think that people should approach looking at things when they have those fantasies that maybe potentially lead to do with their own trauma, things like that? What's the best kind of resources that you think to?
There aren't a lot of resources. There are free workshops. I run one. There is stuff out there on purpose. I really do this stuff, and I do these because it really matters to me. I want to give my bit back. So there are people out there. There are charities out there that you can access. The NHS, but the waiting list can be anywhere from 6 months to 3 years at the moment, depending on where you live. If we're talking about extreme fantasies, that like we also, Cosmic and I once did like a really heavy workshop on extreme fantasies. And the sort of things we were covering were murder, paedophilia, incest. We really were. Like, we really went for it and spoke about it. But then it's interesting because even as a therapist, I see some things that are happening. So, for example, there is a queer therapist who is raising money because they're being sued by somebody who is very anti-queer because they said something that really upset them that was pro-queer. Honestly, it's just like, you couldn't make this stuff up. So it's going to make us go into hiding if we're not careful. Not me, I'm covered for that, I'm not interested. Like, I'm always going to speak out for us. No heterosexual person's going to beat me into the ground over that one, ever. Like, I feel very strongly about it. It's been 40 years, that's not going to happen. I fought for our rights, I've done the marches, I've done that stuff, and I'm not going to stop. But I'm maybe fairly outspoken to people. I watch half the room leave. A lot of people think it's okay to redo a rape or a situation under some kind of kink level. I want to regain my power. Can we replay this, please? Can we do it again? And it might work for a while. However, if anyone understands what happens in trauma in the body and in the brain and in the mind, we can't quite tell the difference between reality and what is and what isn't because of the way trauma is processed in our brain. So a lot of people come into kink and say, I want to use kink to try and process this trauma. And it might work for a while. It might be really positive because the other person really gets it right. One small wrong move, you are utterly re-traumatizing. Again, your body, your system, everything. It takes a long time to develop and work out that trust. It's really important. So re-traumatization is a serious potential when you use kink for trauma. And there are loads of people saying, no, it works really well. Yes, it does. Sometimes. But what if that time isn't for you and that re-traumatization can come in? Yeah.
So you're talking about people doing kink to regain some control. So then could the argument come around that, are we people going into kink? Is it the way that they were brought up is the reason that we become kinky? Or it's that nature versus nature?
Why are we kinky?
Come on, let's talk about it.
There's only 27 minutes left.
Okay. Why are we kinky? Right, okay. There are multiple reasons as to why people are kinky. I'm going to get a bingo over here because I'm going to talk about something called epigenetics.
Bingo!
Right. So, we have genetics. Genetics, your genome. You have a message that tells you what you're going to look like within your whole system. I'm not going to go into the medical aspect of it. I even know there are medical people here. They'll definitely correct me, but I'm going to give you a rough guide. It dictates, your genome will dictate like a book. I'm talking about a metaphor here. Okay? It's not really a book. Don't go up to some like a neurologist and say, so my genes are a book. Of course they're fucking not, right? But imagine you've got this book that says so-and-so is going to have blue eyes and it's going to have brown hair and is going to have white skin. That's the message that comes through and that's how people are born. However, those genetics can go back 20, 30, 40, 50, hundreds of generations. You can have a white couple have an Asian baby. And then people turn and say, you've been fucking having an affair. I really haven't. That baby's genetically yours. It happens to be that 35 generations ago, so-and-so had sex with so-and-so, which created this. And people can even have, like, not non-identical twins, but can even have twins that are different colour, actually different colours of skin. It's incredible, like, what genetics can do. So genetics deem a lot about us and tell us what we're going to look like and what we're going to be. And there are recessive genes and dominant genes, and it's a lot more complex than that. So these things called epigenetics. It's one of my favourite hobbies. I read about it a lot.
Which is why we're bingo.
It's why I talk about it a lot. So we talk about nature versus nurture. When you look at most situations, even people who are likely to do a crime and different things, some people are born with a propensity towards something, potentially. However, it depends on their environment as to whether that's going to be opened up, if that makes sense. So it could be like, so for example, another bingo is going to come in a minute. So I've looked at 2 PhDs. I'm really fascinated in doing one or the other. I'd quite like to do both. The truth is I actually really want to read them. I don't want to do them. One is about retroactive withdrawal of consent as a shame factor, but ethical shame factors, which hits doctors and people in war. But the other one is the transgeneration and epigenetic scripting of sexually submissive women. When I look at my mum's history, when I look at she suffered from sexual assault, she had a few things happen to her, So did my great-grandmother. She went through 3 husbands. They all died on her. She had different children. Like, it was, when I look at my lineage, it's quite interesting. On this side of my lineage is Polish and Russian, Jews escaping from the pogroms, because I am genetically Jewish. I might not practice, but Hitler would definitely want to throw me in some kind of somewhere. So that's my history. I am Jewish by my history, by my genetics, and have had some interest because we can do. So if we are likely or more, we have a propensity because of epigenetics as well. And the reason we know about epigenetics so massively is, if you want to learn about these, look up a woman called Rachel Yehuda. You put it in your phone. If you don't know her, ask me later. She was working with a geneticist in Edinburgh when 9/11 happened. So I've spoken about this before, so I'm really sorry if people have heard this before. When she worked with survivors of the Holocaust, and she was interested in, why is it that these people are frightened of maybe train uniforms? Like they don't want to get on the train. I think, fuck me, that's not hard to work out, is it? Or maybe there's extra food in the bag. That's not hard to work out either. Or we're frightened of a uniform. I wonder why. Come on. Like, these people have survived places like Auschwitz. So there's no surprise there that these things have happened. But what she was curious about is, why is it that the next generation and the next generation have some very similar fears? What's going on there? And what was interesting is there's no sign marker at that time to say, where does this come from and what's happening? But she worked with this geneticist, and what they found was that they thought that maybe so-and-so had been to so-and-so's party, so-and-so's bar mitzvah, and heard the stories, therefore felt traumatized by the stories. But it was also the children who hadn't heard the stories. So they looked for cortisol as a marker. When somebody is highly, highly, highly stressed, anyone here gets stressed often? When you're highly stressed, you have this wonderful substance in your body called cortisol.
I know,
Comes
and I'm
along.
so full of it.
Yeah, and it goes, shh, it's okay. It just calms you down, and it tries to help you calm, right? We can learn techniques. We can learn polyvagal theories, vagal nerve theories. We can learn loads of things around panic. We can really help with panic and anxiety and stress. So what's interesting, if somebody's in a heightened state of stress all the time, eventually what will happen is their cortisol, instead of being up to try and help, will drop. It won't just drop, it will drop below normal. Why? Because your body can't keep creating cortisol. I mentioned my hips, the injections that I have, cortisol, there are differences hugely. But what's interesting is I can only have my hips injected about 3 times a year, because if I put too much of that shit into my body, I'm likely to get a heart attack and die. That's why you can't have your shoulder injected or your knee injected all the time. But that's the way we work with steroids, we work with different things. So cortisol will drop to below a normal level. And what they found with all these babies is they were born with below normal cortisol levels. So these babies were born with PTSD already, most of them. And the way they really backed that up is when 9/11 happened, she asked anybody who was pregnant at any stage or had the cord hadn't been cut at all, so the placenta was completely intact and connected. They asked all the women to come forward who were pregnant at that time, and they did. They tested all the babies, and they found that any baby who was in the 2nd or 3rd trimester of being born at the time, 100% of the babies tested were born with lower than normal cortisol levels. And all of those children have gone on to have problems, indications, issues, and needed therapy and some kind of treatment and help. Until Trump got in, who just said, no, let's not do that anymore. Let's not get into politics. Right, so he stopped that, but and it was, but 100% of these fucking babies, 100%. That's not a slight margin, is it? 100%. The same principles can happen. They did an experiment on mice as well, where they tested this. I'm sorry if you are very pro animals, and I understand that you might not like animal testing. They put these mice into trauma by hurting them, and they always put the smell of cherry blossom in at the same time. Anyone seen this experiment or read about it? So they exposed them to smell of cherry blossom. Eventually, they stopped hurting them and just exposed them to smell of cherry blossom, a bit like Pavlov's dogs, if you've ever heard like the bell and the meat salivating. They went one step further with this lot, and what they did was they let these mice have babies, and the next 6 generations all had exactly the same response to the smell of cherry blossom. So your fear of wasps, your fear of scissors, your fear of sting might not actually even be yours. It might be your great-grandparents or somebody else's.
Oh, gee, thanks now.
Yeah. However, that doesn't mean it can't be helped or changed. Just because it isn't yours doesn't mean you can't do some changes and help yourself either. So these things happen through generations. The argument is, when we look at sexuality and different things. And actually, if you look at a lot of the research around what makes somebody born with something, there is a list of criteria that we have to fit. Say, if I'm born gay, am I born that way? Gay hits the criteria. So interestingly, does kink. If you had childhood fantasies, if you thought about these things, if it's always been on your mind, all of those things, kink falls into a lot of that criteria. So the answer is it's nature and nurture, and it might never come out. One of the best guys, oh shit, forgot his name. Doesn't matter.
So
he was a professor who was an expert in serial killers. And he was also looking at his own family's genetic history around their brains, especially because a lot of his family were having problems with, I think it was Alzheimer's, could have been Parkinson's, I'm not sure, I think it was Alzheimer's. And he dropped some fMRI scans that he was doing, and he got them a little bit mixed up, went into his next lecture. He was a big proponent of serial killers are made, they are not born that way. That was his philosophy all the way through his life. He taught massive rooms full of people, and he talked about it in university, saying that's the way it is. What was interesting is when he brought up a scan, so he said, so if you look here, this is the pattern. You say, look, that curve there, that shows this, that, and the other. And when he looked at it, he went, fuck, that's my scan. So that was really fascinating. He was looking at his own brain scan. And his brain scan was the same, and the same patterns. He had to go back and rethink his whole thesis. He had to rewrite and start again. He's also the same guy that found the warrior gene. So if you remember who that is, that's the same person. So it's really interesting, and the warrior gene is mainly present in cis-born men. Very, very few women have it, but some do. However, your prison population will have over 90% have the warrior gene. So it's that capacity to be angry, to hurt, and to do things. There is a gene that makes a difference. You cannot use it as an excuse in a courtroom, and there is a gene. So it's really...
The book is called Psychopath in Me. As soon as I get online, I'll tell you the author.
Thanks, psychopath.
Wasn't that the same guy who then scanned his dad and found out that his dad had the same?
The whole family did.
Yeah.
So genetically, his whole family had the propensity. But he'd been brought up in an environment of love, of care.
James Fallon.
Thank you. He was brought up in an environment of love and care, which meant he didn't go into that part of himself and was very unlikely to ever. And kink is really interesting because it follows some of the same serial killers. No, not what I mean.
Just look, right?
It links to your question, I suppose. But it's got that same propensity behind it that actually genetically we're much more likely to be like this. I have 4 daughters. If I look at them biologically, genetically, I brought them up. Their dad is their dad's dad was a reverend in a free church. Very Christian, very, this is where we belong. Don't even know them gays in my record collection type of person. And along comes me. Interesting. And my parenting as well. And actually my eldest daughter is, fluid in her sexuality, even though she has a partner who's fluid in his sexuality, and they're together. My next one down is terribly straight. My next one down is demisexual and has a female partner at the moment. And my next one down is also, and a couple of them are into kink. Is it because Darcy found my whole collection and went into my cupboard when she was 8 years old? Maybe. Possibly. But actually, if that wouldn't have turned her on, it would have disgusted her and she would not have gone into it. Because we do have natural revulsion of things as much as, it's the same with food, isn't it? Someone puts something on your plate, you go, oh, I can't eat that. And somebody else loves it. It's there, isn't it? So it's a lot of this stuff is quite innate, we're born. So the argument for me is, and I would definitely do a PhD on it, is nature and nurture, and I would argue epigenetics and some genetic disposition towards it. I don't know if that helps. Does that answer you at all? Yeah. That's where I would go.
Another good book, just another good story document of the series by Robert Sapolsky. He goes into the details of that until your brain hurts. The book is called Behave, and it's
a good book. It's a heavy book. I would argue it's a heavy book. Or you look online, you can look at TASHRA, which is one of the American organisations that are doing all the research into kink at the moment. And one of them has a really interesting paper that backs up what I'm saying, talking about it is very much about how we're born, everything else. So TASHRA.org, I think it is. I might be wrong, but TASHRA in the USA.
One of the big things that I'm one of those people that research it a ton. And mental health comes up a lot in the research into the kink community and everything. What are some of the biggest, traps that you'll find with mental health in entering this sort of lifestyle and the best tools that we can have to sort of ensure that we're keeping healthy.
Right, so there are two trends of thought on this with the research as well. That is that kinksters are better at their mental health, and that is that they're no different. I'm really sorry if I'm going to upset anyone. I'm going to go with no different. I'm going to go with no different because we reflect the world. The research that says we're different is very fucking small. Pamela Stevenson, really commonest wife, is a psychotherapist, and she's done some research into this, and her research is small. It's a very small group that says we are so much better than the vanillas out there at sorting out our mental health, and it's not as prevalent. That's not my experience. So I think there are people who come into kink to try and sort out their trauma. I think there are people that come into kink because they feel like they have to. They've been brought up as a people pleaser. It might be that one of their trauma responses is fawning, so when in a trauma response, you've got fight, flight, freeze, which are the three most popular, but we also have friend, fuck, flow, fawn, flop. There are lots of F's around trauma. So some people, so for me, it'd be all about, why do you like kink? That'd be one of the things, like, why are you here? What are you looking for from this? Some people are really after self-healing. I would argue that mental health is worse than probably it ever has been. It's certainly not better. The average statistic is 1 in 4. That's a heap of shit.
That's a lie.
Anyone here a therapist? I know a few of you are. I would argue that in my practice, I would argue that half the people I see don't go to the doctors about anything. The doctors have no idea, and their work has no idea. Would you say that's similar for your practice as well? So I know that I know a few people. So I find it interesting. So if my practice and other people's practices reflect that only half the amount of people in our practice have some form of support or tablets or anything else as well, psychopharmacology, those figures aren't right then, are they? Because a lot of the way we do the research into that is actually by psychopharmacology. Who's getting a prescription, what's happening? So there's a lot of people out there who have way more issues and struggles with their mental health. I think kink can be really good for mental health. Why? Because it allows you to be yourself. Because you can really work out who you are and work with what that means to you. I think if you're with a good kinkster, we fucking really want to be hot on communication. And if we're hot on communication, that also helps our mental health. We've got to give people time. So we've got to make sure our crutches don't get in the way of the time that we're actually seeing and what we're doing. I think as well, take time out. Make sure, is this good for me as a human being? It's a big question I ask myself even when I'm not doing kink. If I feel like I don't want to get out of bed, what's best for you, Deb? Get up and carry on working, do everything you've got to do, or just stay in bed all day? What's best for me as a human being? Get up. And even if I can't get out of bed, I might just sit up for a minute. That'll do. Just achieve something. Can I swing my legs off the bed? Yep, that's a start. Well done, Deb. Good. Get on that. Take smaller chunks, smaller bites. I do think we have to be aware of mental health in kink. We've got to be aware of things like drop. People talk about sub-drop. It's not yours. Sorry, it's everybody's. Everybody drops. Tops, bottoms, middles, everybody drops. Drop is a thing that happens in real life. It happens if you're a performer. It happens if you're in a sports thing. You should see our kids, like they've just done Dallas and Florida, and they're just about to do another one in Florida, and then they're going back to Florida again. And honestly, the drop between each of these competitions is unreal for them to plummet from, because they're on such a high with all the norepinephrine or adrenaline, whatever, and it's all so big and it's all really exciting. It's all these chemicals that happen in our bodies. So I think if we have mental health issues, we have to be really careful around drop, because it can look like depression, but of course it could be depression. And I think the other thing that happens in kink is there are a shit ton of endorphins that happen if you are the bottom. And if you have a shit ton of endorphins on, it can help pull you out. So it's a really nice temporary feeling. It isn't, however, a long-term fix. I would really say to anybody, go and see a kinky aware therapist as well. I think that's really important. Kinky aware is interesting. I mean, what does it mean? Ask your therapist. What's your experience around kink? It's a good question. You are not there to educate your therapist. You're there to educate them about you. If you say to me you're submissive, I'll go, cool. What does that mean? I know what it means to me. I don't know what it means to you. You don't have to explain all the details to me because it's been my life for 40 years. That's the difference. But I want to understand you in it. That's the difference as well. So ask. So get some support. Get some help. Make sure you've got a good group of friends. Start to develop people that you know. That you can say, fucking hell, this happened and that happened. And I'm not so good about this. Please, can I help myself? Get some books. Like, so for example, there's some really good books, like I was saying earlier actually to a couple, Polysecure. If we're going to get to ethical non-monogamy, read something like Polysecure. And I've got a writing about attachment as well. I think it came out around the same time. Mine are free on FetLife. That's a really good book.
There are even books, like if people don't like reading, they're really nice comic books.
Yeah, there's so
It's
much.
just a very nice, very easy, just seeing pictures. It's really funny. It teaches a hell of a lot.
Yeah,
Like you don't need to go into a deep, thick book.
no, you don't.
You can just learn by
Yeah, or read a writing that takes 5 minutes. Just
listen to the
stop.
people around you.
Yeah.
Learn from their mistakes.
And
Unless
also
they're
be aware that emotions really play up in kink and in ethical non-monogamy. Our emotions are very powerful things. Therapists come from all different tracks as to how we work and the sort of modalities that we work with. So we might come from a very different level. Some people might really do CBT, which is more about your thought process and your behaviours. Other people will want to work on the emotions and the bits underneath. We're all different as to how we work. I'm a big believer in you're born a certain way, you have very strong emotions. I see it like a house. So you can change the soft furnishings, which is like changing your thoughts or your behaviour, or you can build an extension. If your foundations are fucked, which are your feelings, your house won't stand no matter what. So I like working a bit deeper with people on real feeling responses. I know I shouldn't eat that 6 custard donut. I know exactly how many calories are in it. I don't give a flying fuck. My hand's still going for it because I fucking want it. And it's the feeling that does that, not the, how could you interrupt your thought process there? Well, I could tell myself that there are this many calories in there, this sugar, that it's processed. I understand the impact on my brain. I know! It doesn't always help me, obviously. So it's really important that we work with the feelings underneath and what it's about. It doesn't necessarily mean it changes anything. So I think working on yourself is very important at the same time. Communicate when something comes up for you. If you do something with someone, don't just go and say they're a fucking wanker, they did this to me. Go back and say, if you can and if you feel safe enough. I'm not talking about someone who's violated your consent. I'm talking about a clusterfuck where something goes wrong, they're different. Go and have a conversation. That didn't go well for me. Why? What happened? Have that conversation. It's really important if you can. That helps your mental health as well, standing up for yourself. Anyone here submissive or a switch that's leaning on the sub? Really learn to stand up for yourselves. Please learn to have conversations.
I wanted to ask exactly what you said. I mean, how would you handle that conversation about something went wrong? And kind of like, how do you handle the guilt that the other person feels? Because they didn't intend for something to go wrong, they didn't intend to hurt you. And move past that and then come to a resolution.
So I think before you even start playing with someone, you negotiate that up front so you stop the problem. Listen, things go wrong. What's our process afterwards if something goes wrong for either of us? I've written a piece called a clusterfuck thing, what now? For me, it starts with pre-negotiation. Say to somebody very clearly, I have a very strong policy. If something goes wrong, I might not be able to speak exactly at the time. Can I come back to you and can we have a conversation and sit down, very civil human beings, and just say, and by the way, what I want from you is to act, or what I want from you is to listen. Tell people what you want. How many people, when you have an argument with them as well, it's because you were trying to solve something for them, especially cis-born men. Here's your solution. And a lot of cis-born women are just saying, could you just fucking listen? And then you've got everybody across the whole spectrum leaning in different ways, depending on our hormones, depending on our genetics and everything else as well. So we all vary. So I think we have to negotiate what we want from a conversation. I think one of the big things we have to learn as human beings, and certainly therapeutically, is your feelings are your problem, my feelings are my problem. And so if you have guilt, I'm really sorry you have guilt. I suggest that you go and see a therapist. I suggest you go and talk to somebody else. I don't want your feelings on me. Communication is a fucking enemy of communication. And what you find is a lot of people, when they're talking, justify, yeah, but I didn't mean to. It's irrelevant, it happened. So it's the strength to bring someone back to the problem as well. That's really important. I understand that's how you feel. Can we not let that get in the way? This is for me as well. I'm trying to share with you. I want to share with you. If not, you can't handle this, I'm happy to write it down. If not, I'm happy to go and get a mediator. If not, I'm happy to get a few other people involved in these conversations. Preferably someone experienced who can help as well. But it's really important to share because the other person will never learn. I've had things go wrong. I mean, honestly, any person who owns a vulva here and has had sex, this is really graphic and personal, sorry, and you don't have to answer. But anyone had it slipped in their ass by accident. A few, yeah? It happens, right? The person didn't mean to. It can be really fucking painful if you're not prepared for it. It can cause anal fissures, anal tears. It can do all sorts of stuff. But sometimes in the heat of the moment, especially if you use a lot of lube or you're very wet
Or in
or
the
you're not
shower.
looking or in the shower, you know, like different places where you can't quite see, this sort of shit happens. That person hasn't raped you. That person hasn't meant to do anything, and it's absolutely awful. It's absolutely awful. It is no one's fault. However, this person is really suffering potentially. And there are differences in safety around anal and vaginal sex, for sure. So we need different conversations. I think we need to be able to have these conversations. So part of me, if I'm negotiating with somebody, I'll negotiate my need for the conversation afterwards before. It's a bit late for some people some of the time, but that's definitely something I would do in kink. So if anything goes wrong, how do we have a conversation afterwards? It's really hard if you have a power dynamic shift. Daddy, sir, mummy, mistress, whoever the person is, top, whatever it is. What was that? Alpha. The top guys. I need to be able to have a conversation with you where we are equals. My big philosophy on this is you start as equals and you negotiate inequality. You don't start unequal and negotiate anything else. You start as equals.
What are some red flags in those conversations?
Oh, fucking hell, so many. So many. I mean, looking out for green flags is a really good idea. I've got a writing on that. Somebody who won't listen to you, somebody who won't answer questions, somebody who says they're always right, or in my experience, somebody who says everybody should, why aren't you listening? Somebody who just doesn't give you a chance to say anything. Somebody who won't say, completely respect you, of course, let's have this conversation. How can we have it so that you feel equal, in case if you're the bottom or you're the top, you know, corner of a table is a really good idea instead of opposites, all sorts of stuff. There are techniques. So people who are just stuck in their own pattern and also who want to justify all the time. You don't understand. It was a really stressful day. It wasn't my fault. It was my arse. Stop. And if they don't stop and they don't listen, and I also think people who negotiate mid-term of a scene or doing those sort of things, they're huge red flags for me. Please don't. We agreed we're going to do this. You can always do more. You cannot go backwards or take it away, ever, especially in a play scene. So lots of telling and should. And if you feel smaller than the person, if they make you feel smaller, it might be you. You might be that person who goes, might be. However, if you're constantly feeling that around that person, why? What is it about them?
I would also say stonewalling.
Stonewalling. So stonewalling is silence. When someone won't answer you, when someone won't talk to you. That's one of my hard limits. If you do not communicate with me over something that's gone wrong, I'm out.
We'll use it as a punishment.
Oh, that again, it's a red flag for me. It's if you think not talking to me for 3 hours, you can go fuck yourself then. I'm not interested. I am worth more. Screw you. However, some people stonewall because they've been talked to. Some people stonewall because they don't know how to handle their own feelings. So sometimes my negotiation could be, I don't think you're conscious that you're stonewalling. You need to go and see a professional. Please do that. And if they're not interested in doing that, I'm still out. I'm always going to give someone a chance. But if you want accountable, that's one of the key words for me. If you ain't accountable for your own shit, you cannot shit on me. Because that's what play is, isn't it? You're kind of being shat on quite a lot. I mean, I don't like scat, but you know what I mean. Metaphorically shat on. Metaphorically shat on. And that really matters to me as well. And we have to wrap up. There's another workshop and there's another couple. I am here next month. I'm not here in May. If you've got any questions as well, you can always grab me, come and say hello. I'm around for a while.